So today we are going to be working, first of all, I should probably introduce myself. My name is Tori and I am the creative manager for Premier Yarns. And today we're going to be working with our Pixie dust yarn, creating a little bear Lovey, which is just a fun little project that kids love, and it's great for babies. I know my son has already spotted all the samples I have hanging around and he keeps trying to steal it. So if you've got any little ones, they're going to be very excited about this project. So I think we're all set. We can go to the overhead cam and I can show you what we're going to be working with today. So here is our little bear. And so Loveys are basically, they're almost like a combination security blanket and a stuffed animal. So these are really great when you're learning how to do toy making for the first time, because they're really simple and you don't have all of the things. You're just worrying about, doing the face and doing like the ears. You're not having arms, legs, tails, all kinds of things. So these are a really great place to start, I feel like. And for this project today, we are using our Pixie dust yarn. And this is a chenille with a little bit of metallic. So it has a little bit of sparkle to it, but it's subtle and it's not scratchy, which is the really nice. Some yarns with sparkles, they tend to feel really rough, whereas these stay nice and soft, and they're great because, it's not going to irritate the little one's skin. And if you have, the pattern is available at Michael's where you got the class, or also from premier.com. You can also download it there. And the pattern also includes instructions for a hat, but today we're just going to be working on the Lovey. And in addition, you're going to need your double pointed needles and a circular needle as well. Of course, tapestry needle, always scissors, tape measure, and stitch markers. So I'm going to get started, and you guys are free to follow along if you want to make as the class goes along, but I know it's hard to make a complete project in a single hour. So at any time, you guys can come back to this video because it will be recorded and it'll be available on the YouTube channel within one business day. You'll be able to get that. So you can come back and then work at your own pace. So I'm going to get started. And for this project, we begin on the double pointed needles, and I am using size 8 or 5 millimeter. And I like to do a long tail cast on, and I always do, I like to leave for this one because we are going to use the long tail to later sew up the top of the head and also to create the ears. So leave a bit longer of a tail than you normally would, because we're going to begin by casting on 32 stitches. So you'll want to just leave a little additional tail. And when I am working out the length to make my tail, for me, usually a full arm length, it's kind of hard to see, like I go pretty much from the tip of my fingers all the way to my shoulders. With most yarns, that gets me about 30 stitches cast on. So I like to just allow a little extra for that. And then so since I'm doing the long tail cast on, I'm starting with a slip knot, and then I'm going to cast on 32 stitches. And I'm doing it all onto a single DPN, and then we'll divide it up later because I begin by working with 2 DPNs, and then once we've got the head complete, then I add an additional 2 additional needles. So we're working with a total of 4 on the body and then the 5th to knit. So I've got 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Oops, let me not do this too fast. 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Let me get a little more I tried to avoid getting yarn barf, but I think I'm not going to be successful. That 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, and 32. So now we're going to add, we're going to bring in our second needle. So we are going to split these stitches. Now the only, I would say, downside of working with chenille type yarns, you know, now it looks like we've just got a fuzzy caterpillar here. So I always like to go back and double check my stitch count to make sure I didn't miss anything or need to cast on additional stitches. So I'm going to split this now. So I'm going to have 16 on each needle. 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 11, 12, 16. And obviously, if you prefer, magic loop works well for this. If you like using one single long circular needle, or my absolute favorite method, especially when working smaller circumferences, is using 2 smaller circular needles, like say 2 16-inch circular needles, and then you can do the whole project without having to switch or add in like this. Like we'll be working first on 2 double pointed needles. Once we get through the head, then we'll be adding 2 more in as we work the increases, because this entire project is worked in the round. And the blanket, it's still square, but it's created by making 2 increases at each corner every other round once we get to that part.
Hey, Tori, Catherine has a question.
Sure.
So she wants to know if we can use a different type of yarn, and if so, what should we look for?
You can. This pattern is written for a worsted weight yarn. So because this is a chenille type yarn, you're able to get away with using the recommended needle size because the fluff basically fills in those gaps. Because when you do make a toy, like you can see on the face where how it's fuzzy, that prevents you from seeing any of the stuffing. So if you are using a smoother yarn or a slightly thinner yarn, you might want to go down a needle size or 2, down to a 7 or a 6. And then the nice thing about this project is, since you're just increasing on the blanket part until you get to the desired size, you can just work additional increase rounds on the blanket part. So it is pretty adaptable since it is a toy. There's not really, you know, it's not like a sweater. It doesn't have to fit. So if your gauge isn't exact or you're, you know, a little bit off, you're not going to have to, you know, rip it out and redo it, or, you know, find someone who's a different size that can wear it. And now in this part, we're just working 2 rounds even. And then once we complete these rounds, we are going to be working on ears. And the ears are created just by a series of increases and decreases. And I'll show you what that looks like. Sorry, this is the only bad part about knitting on camera. My first rows always end up so tight because it's always.
Tori, we have another question.
Sure.
Can you knit this flat?
You can. And basically what you would do to work this flat is add an additional 2 stitches. And when you are doing that, you're going to want the seam to be at the back of the head. So you would cast on flat and the edges would be here. So the only thing you will have to consider is moving the shaping for the ears, because you want them to be on the side of the head. But if you were going to do it flat, you would want the seam to be down the back. And you would use those 2 additional stitches for doing your seam, which mattress stitch is preferred just because it's pretty much invisible once complete. But it does sometimes take a little bit of additional thought when you are switching these around, but you can put markers in there. So you know, since it is just the increase rows or rounds and the decrease rounds are just worked one right after the other. So if you did do it flat and just put those markers so you would know where to place them without having to use the stitch counts given in the pattern for working in the round. Like, I hope that helps a bit.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So what I'm going to do now is show you what our increases are going to look like. And then, as you can see, when you do have like this long tail hanging out from your cast on that we're saving later, you can always just wind them up and tie them in a knot. Sometimes I just like let them hang out. But this is the one case where we do, like I said, since we are going to use that later, we want this long tail instead of cutting it off. But now this is what I'm talking about with the ear shaping, because it needs to stay on the side of the head. So it's always going to be one stitch in. We're going to work a knit front and back. Let me see if I can, let me know if you need me to do it slower to see it better. It's a little hard in fur yarn to, let me pop this off and we'll do it again for you. So you knit into the front of the stitch and then go around without sliding it off and then into the back of the stitch. Now, of course, if you don't like that increase, you can sub in others, but since this pattern was written with this fluffy yarn in mind, knit front and back is kind of the easiest to keep track of in this yarn. And that's the only thing I do say with fuzzy yarns, kind of being aware of catching every stitch, because it's hard to see if you are always getting in the stitch. And I've, even me who has been knitting and designing for years, I still occasionally end up dropping a stitch and having to dig out my crochet hook so I can ladder them back up. But so you'll see we've just did our first half of our ear shapings, and that is going to create little bumps. So right now we're basically just making a tube, and at the top you're going to have little bumps that are going to be the ears later on. And then we have our next knit front and back. And then we are going to go to the last two stitches and do another. And then this is a really easy way, instead of having to make the ears later and then sew them on. This way, when you're sewing up the top of the head, you already have the little bumps there. So you'll just do a little running stitch to help define those ears in that placement. So here we are at our next back. And that is another thing to consider when doing this flat, instead of, because then you'll have rows where you're going to be working increases and decreases on the wrong side. So instead of knit front and back, you'll be working a purl front and back. And same thing, once we get to our decreases, you'll have to work like a purl two together instead of doing a knit two together on the right side, and also a purl two together through the back loop for your left leaning decreases. So this is our second increase round for the ears. So we are knitting into the front and back. So when you're all done with the increases, you're going to have increased by a total of 8 stitches. And then we're just going to decrease them away again. And let me know if this is, got my pattern here, but if it's blocking your view, let me know.
So Tori, we have a couple of requests. Could you go maybe a teeny tiny bit slower? And also, especially with the details, is there any way you could like just bring it up a little more to the camera so we can see?
Sure.
Thank you.
Here we go. So now we're back to the increase here. So this is our knit front and back. And it's going to be in this stitch here. So we're knitting into the front, but leaving the stitch on the needle. And then we are knitting into the back. And this is increasing by 1 stitch. And then on all of our increase rounds, we're doing a total of 4. So here we go. Let me see. Can get this a little closer. So here's our next knit front and back. So as you can see, I'm just knitting through the front loop, pulling that through. And then we're going to be knitting through that back loop. Let's see, I don't know if that's focusing nice for you guys, if you can see that well. And then once you've got those 2, the knit front and back, then you can slip that stitch off. And also at any point, and I know I've seen a few people mention it, this, you know,
Tori, it seems like we lost sound. Everyone, we're having technical difficulties. Just give us 1 second. Tori, if you can hear me, we lost your other video, your front-facing video. Just 1 second, everyone. We'll be right back. There we are.
all right, sorry about that. For some reason, it decided to kick out my,
No problem.
you know, I'm like, all of a sudden my thing just went out. Mute that. All right, sorry about that. I tried to get on my phone then so I could talk to you guys, but I have so many different things turned on and turned off. So now that we have completed our increase rounds, we are ready to move on to those decrease rounds. So this, like I said, creating those bumps for our ears, and it's just 2 rounds of rapid increases and then 2 rounds of rapid decreases that are going to create the bumps for our ears. So on this round, we are working the first stitch and then we're going to slip, slip, knit. And we'll see if you can see this. So you slip both stitches individually knitwise, and then you knit them through the back loop. So that's decreasing by 1 stitch. And then we're going to work to the last 3 stitches and then knit 2 together and knit 1. All right, we are almost there. Here we go. So we've got those 2 stitches, and the reason we're working, obviously, the 2 different types of decreases. Slip, slip, knit is a left leaning decrease. So that's gonna create, again, because we're trying to get the ears, since we're working this direction, we're working top down. And this way we increased out, and now we're decreasing in to the left. And then on this side, we increased out and we're decreasing down in to the right to create that rounded shape. And then we're going to do the same thing on this side. We've got our knit 1 and then our slip, slip, knit. I'm going to see if I can get a little closer. It's easier to see. So we slip 2 individually knitwise. And that's pretty much the only time we're going to be slipping things knitwise is when you're working a decrease, because it creates a twist in the stitches. And that's why we slip them knitwise and then knit them together through the back loop. And then we go to the last 3 stitches so we can knit 2 together and create our right leaning decrease. And so once we've completed this set of 4 rounds, we're going to be back at the same number we started with. Since we started with 32 stitches, then we increased and then decreased. So once we're complete, we're going to be right back where we started. So knit 2 together. So I'll separate them. See, this is with the chenille type yarns. So we've got our last 3, and we're going to insert that into the 2 stitches and knit them together. And now we are ready to do our last decrease round. And after this, then all you do is work even in the round. So here we go. Get our slip, slip, and then knit them together through the back loop. And then work to our last 3 stitches to work our knit 2 together. All right, and we are almost there. And here we go. We've got our knit 2 together, decreasing by another stitch. And then this is going to be our last. And then after this, I'm going to show you our next steps. Now that we've gotten through all the shaping that is done for the head. So that's our slip, slip, knit. And then we're going to work to the last 3 stitches to do our knit 2 together. And then I'm going to show you what the head looks like once it is complete. Because after this round, you just work even in the round in stockinette stitch, which is knitting every round until the head measures 4 inches from the cast on edge. And now we've got our last 2, knit 2 together, knit 1. And then, like I said, this is the point where we made our little ears here, and then you're just going to work straight. and then measure from this, from your cast on edge. And then I'll show you what that looks like when it is complete. This is what you end up with. This is what your hat looks like, and that's where you measure from until you get your 4 inches. And then at this point, like I said, dependent on if you want to do magic loop or 2 circulars, or as the pattern is written for 4 double pointed needles. On this row, you are going to divide it into 8 stitches on each needle. And we start that with our increase round. So we're going to knit 1, knit into the front and back. And then actually let me do this first. Let me just get everyone on their respective needles before I jump to the increases. So I've got 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then we'll have 8 on this needle. I'm going to steal from the guy we were just working on. And so at this point, you will go from working with 3 double pointed needles to working with 5. And each needle, once we've got them all separated, because we have a total of 32 stitches and 4 needles, we're going to have 8 stitches on each needle. And when patterns like this are written for using the double pointed needles, like you can see in the pattern, it references, you knit 1, you increase, then you work to the last 2 stitches on the needle. If you don't want to use these, you can just go straight to, like I said, with magic loop, or on 2 circulars, you can use markers to indicate your placement. So instead of, getting them onto 4 double pointed needles, you'd have it on 2 circulars and have a marker at the center of each, just as long as you've got it divided up into 8 stitches for your increase placement. Because to create these square blankets in the round, like I said, there are 2 increases at each corner that create that square shape, but enable you to continue working in the round. All right, so this is our needle, and I'm going to show you our next increase round after this. So this is the beginning of that blanket. So if you're following along in the pattern, we've just moved on from the head and shaping the ears, and now I'm showing you how we are beginning the blanket part of your Lovey. So here we go. Now we are back to the beginning, and as we get further away, I usually use my tail to kind of remind me where the beginning end of the round is. But once you get further away, sometimes it's hard to do that. So I like to just pop on at this point a little locking stitch marker. Then I know where the beginning is. Also, this is helpful later because when we stuff the head, this is the point that we are going to put that running stitch in to close the head once we've stuffed it. So I'm going to go through and show you all an increase round. So they are all going to be knit 1, knit into the front and back. And I'm hoping this color might show up a little better on the later background. And then we are going to knit to the end. Oh, and I did see some people asking about the hat in this pattern. Actually, if you go to Premier Yarns YouTube, we have already done a YouTube series on the hat. So you can find that there, and it's just Premier Yarns. is the name of our channel on YouTube. And we did an entire series on the hat, from, you know, working in the round, making the ears and sewing the ears onto the hat. So you can find that there, and it's a full, I believe it's a couple videos. So it's broken down into a little series with multiple steps. And of course, since it's already pre-recorded, it's a little easier to follow along since it's not a live video. All right, so as you can see here, I'm just continuing in the round, and we are working that knit front and back right before the last stitch on the needle and right after the first stitch on each needle. And this is creating a total of 8 increases every other round. Okay, I see. To make the blanket larger, this is the great part. Once you get going in the round like this, you can just continue repeating these 2 rounds. The one round where you knit even, and then the increase round where you work the knit front and backs until it's as large as you want, basically until you run out of yarn. You can go as long as you save enough to, you know, make a bit of a border and to bind off. You are good to go. You can just keep going. This is the nice thing about this. A lot of times you'll see shawls too. If you see square shawls, they're worked in a similar manner. And you can start something like this with just a few stitches cast on in the round, say 4 or 8 stitches, and then just begin increasing from there. And that's another way to create square baby blankets or shawls or wraps. And then here we go. So we are working the last set of increases for this round. And then you're going to continue in this manner because our next round is going to be just an even round. So if you were working this flat, you would alternate increases on the right side with purl rows on the wrong side. But since we are, the pattern is written for the round, we just continue around, and then our second round is just even knitting. So this is the part where it's just, you know, nice kind of mindless knitting. You have the little bit of interest of working those increases every other round, but having either stitch markers or working on the needles helps remind you how to, where you have to place your increases on this.
So Tori, if someone wants to make the blanket a little longer, how would you go about doing that?
Yeah, I was just talking about that. You can just continue alternating the increase rounds and the even rounds. And it's really, at that point, it's how much yarn and how much time have you got? You know, you can just keep on going for as long as you want until you have the size that you desire. Like I said, as long as you save enough to either add a little bit of a border and for binding off, to allow for binding off.
Perfect. And can you use circular needles?
You sure can. I'm going to show you, actually, I'm going to finish this on working on this needle, and I'm going to show you what it looks like, because I have one, because I have like a million little step outs of these things. And I'm going to show you what it looks like when you do work it on 2 circular needles. And as I said in the beginning, it can also be done magic loop on one really long circular needle. You'll probably want usually at least a 40-inch circular if you are going to do magic loop. But here's, and this one is kind of where we left off for the other guy. This one just has the ears done and no even rounds after it. But kind of like you did with the double pointed needles, where you had half on one DPN and half on the other, you can do half, and these are, one is a 16-inch and one is actually like, I had it specially made, it's a 20-inch circular needle. And when you're working something like this, I have to admit, this is my favorite method for small circumference knitting in the round. It is a little bit like an octopus sometimes because you've got the circulars hanging around, but it's really flexible for making baby hats because it leaves you, you know, a lot of flexibility because you don't have to switch down. Once you get to crown shaping, you can stay on these two needles the entire time. And as you see, you always have one needle that's just hanging. And so you're always working with the set together. So I'll show you, I'll do a round, an even round on this. So you can see what that looks like before I step us out to the next level. But this is also really great for socks. And my absolute favorite is using it for sweater sleeves. It just, it's easy to keep it kind of still easy without causing too much laddering or too much tension on the stitches in the joints because it's not pulling on it as much, I find, as using double pointed needles or using magic loop. I swear, once I found this, I was like, I'm never doing anything else. Like, I'm 2 circular needles forever. So as you can see there, I pulled that one out. And of course, if you're like me, I probably have at least a dozen sets of needles, especially in my favorites, like size 8. I am a size 8 needle aficionado. So I have tons of circulars in this size. So it's easy. It can be harder if you don't have, you know, a lot of sets of needles. But if you are interested in trying it, I always recommend going for like the size you use most. Like I do, I use size 8s a lot and size like 6 or 7 a lot. So those were the ones I kind of started having extras with and then branched out from there. Oh, I see that. These are actually, I have one is a 16-inch and my other is actually a 20-inch, just due to the length of the needles. I met the people who make the needles and they made a custom cord for me. So it's close, but not quite. So you can see that's something that is a really great option for a ton of things. And I did see someone ask what magic loop is, and I don't really have anything set up long enough to show right now, but magic loop, instead of having this on 2 circular needles, you would end up having all of these stitches on 1 circular with a really long cord. So it would look like this. You would basically split the stitches and then pull big loops out. I definitely recommend Googling it. There are some amazing videos on it. I used to, before I got into the whole 2 circulars, I was, you know, 99% of the time using magic loop, but it can be picky dependent on what kind of cord you have, like what kind of cable. Like something like this, which is a little stiffer, you can see, whereas compared to these are really fine, very flexible and very thin cords, or I mean, I don't even know if you can see them on this camera because they're so thin and fine. So that's definitely something when you are going into magic loop, something to think about, having a really flexible cord on your needles, on your circulars that you're using. But next up, I'm going to show you, if you had proceeded as the pattern is written, using first the 2 double pointed needles and then switching to the 4. Once you get a few increase rounds in, I would say this is about 3 inches in. It is specifically indicated in the pattern. Once you have 64 stitches total is when you can switch on over to that circular needle. And then from this point, you can work the rest of the pattern just on a single circular. Or like I said, if you were already doing the 2 circulars, you would be able to just work all the stitches onto one at this point. But to show you, as the pattern is written, how to do this when you go from our 4 needles down to 1. And I always like to do this personally on a non-increase round. So that's going to be our beginning and end of round here. And then as we go through, we are going to place a marker once we knit all the stitches off of each needle, because then those are still going to be our increase points. And so then instead of having the end of the needle now as our indicator, we're going to be using those markers as the indicator. And then once I show you this, I'm going to pop out so I have time to answer any questions and show you how we work on embroidering the face, because that's always kind of, I know that took me a really long time to get to where I felt like I liked the way my animal faces looked. Because I mean, you are trying to make yarn look like a live animal kind of thing. So it isn't always the easiest to make it look realistic, or to make it look cute and appealing to children. So as you can see, as each DPN is dropped, I'm placing that marker, and those are going to continue to be those corners that we increase at. And then this is the portion of the pattern where, like I said, you just keep going, alternating the increase and the even rounds, you know, to your desired size, or as written, it increases up to 208 stitches to create this size. Because you want it to be a decent size, you know, for little ones to actually grip onto, but also not so overwhelming, especially if it's for a smaller child. Here we go. We are ready to add our next marker. See if this is, corners are always a little annoying part for me with double pointed needles.
Tori, we have a couple of questions.
Sure, go ahead.
Is there any particular brand that you would recommend for the flexible ones?
There are so many out there. The ones I have are KA Switch. The other ones are Indian River Artisan. And these are kind of smaller companies. Those are good places to start. Also, I'm trying to think the other brands I have. But the KA Switch, I have to be honest, that was the very first set of interchangeables that I purchased. And they're still my favorite. I don't know how I lucked out as a newer knitter getting good needles that I love right off the bat, because I know a lot of people kind of go through a million different iterations and sets before they find something I really love. And I just lucked out and found them in an online search, and it's just KA Switch. And I use the bamboo because I have carpal tunnel, and I found that metal needles aggravate my carpal tunnel. So I stick with either laminated wood, and these are just our Premier branded needles are the laminated wood, or bamboo needles, because they're lighter weight and they're a little grippier, because I find that my carpal tunnel gets aggravated by gripping like metal needles too tight. kind of trying to prevent stitches from slipping off of them. And I've never gotten out of that bad habit. So I end up using grippier needles. But I'll let you, before I ramble too far, you can go ahead and let me know if there's any other questions.
Yes, we have one more question.
Sure.
So how many inches should you have before you change to circular?
This is only a couple. It's about 2 or 3. In the pattern, I recommend at least 64 stitches, just so you have enough to comfortably fit on that circular, because you don't want it, kind of don't want to switch too soon and end up kind of really stretching them around that circular and pulling them out of shape. So it's always better to go a little longer than you think, than to not have quite enough stitches to reach the full circumference of your circular needle. But in here, I'm almost done with getting that last DPN out of here. And I'll show you once I've got this off. So this is, you want to get to the point, like I said, for me, it's written into the pattern, 64 stitches, where everything fits comfortably around. You don't want it to be like, if it was short and you're having to, really stretch, you don't want it to look like this on your circular, because you don't have enough stitches yet. You want to wait until you have at least 64 stitches, and it is indicated at that point in the pattern. So that's going to be enough to go around the circumference of your needle. And if you are working with a slightly longer circular, you can just stay on those DPNs a little longer. Or if you do want to work on those 2 circulars as well, that's also an option, because you can, stay on 2 circulars forever if you like, or, wait until you get to that point where you have a decent amount of stitches to switch over to a single. But so you can see here that that's where, you can see their bare head there, and then our blanket shape is forming. So now, to make sure I don't run out of time, I'm going to show you guys what we do once we are ready to embroider the face. And I've got a completed guy here. Well, not complete. This is what it's going to look like once your blanket is done. And then to do the head, this one is already sewn up. So you are going to seam this top closed, and you can even turn it inside out if you want, and just because that's the beauty of chenille yarns. You don't have to have these amazingly perfect seams. I like to just seam through here, going back and forth, catching those, going underneath those cast on stitches. And then before you go to the ears, you'll turn it right side out, and it's just going to be a series of running stitches. So once this is sewn, you are just going to go in and out, right side to right side, right along this column to create that. Sorry, the sun is going down and I'm losing my good lighting here. But you'll end up creating these little ears here, and you can pull the yarn a little tight there as you're doing that running stitch right along these corners, because that'll kind of just bump them out a little bit. And then at this point, this is when you want to embroider the face on. And to do this, I like to, we do have, obviously you have the picture so you can see what that looks like, and you can use your stitches as a guide. So you can see here, our eyes are about 1.5 stitches wide. So we're going to be doing satin stitch on this. And I like to, this is the part where you just use a smooth yarn to embroider this on. I'm just using a worsted weight acrylic, and I've got a little bit of a lighter DK if you want to add these little highlights in the eye, just to kind of, it makes them look a little less flat when you have that little highlight on there. So I'm going to thread the black onto my needle, And dependent on the thickness of your yarn, I'm gonna see, you can either double it up when you're sewing, or you can just do a single strand at a time. And so we're going to come from the inside, and since we know there are approximately 3 stitches between the eyes, so the width of 3 columns. So if you can kind of pull them apart, that helps you get a little reference there. And sometimes what I like to do to help myself figure out where I'm going, I'll mark where I'm going to put one with a removable marker, and then also the other one equidistant. So then I know when I go back, I've left the right amount of space. And I don't knot anything off until I'm happy with my. So I'll go through, and like I said, I'm going to do 1.5 stitches. So I've come up on this column here, and you can see, so this right here is the width of 1 stitch. So I'm going to go down into the center of this stitch, right where I am. So I'm going to try to make sure, if you guys let me know if you can't see this well, and I'll try to adjust my hold, see if I can get that better. And I like to leave these a little loose at first and not pull them too tight until I kind of gauge how I'm liking that. And then once you've got your placement right, we're just going to keep, with satin stitch, you basically just keep going one right next to the other until you kind of fill in all that space. And then we go back in, and this is just what we're going to do basically until we get the shape we want. And then if you see I missed, when you go over next time, you can just go next to it, because if they have a little bit of heft to them, it adds that realistic look. So as you can see, they're kind of bumping out a bit. So we're going to go over it a few times to get that full look. And the great part about all knitting and toy making is if it doesn't look good, you can pull it out and start over. I know I do that a lot when I'm not happy with my faces. So I'll do that, and I'm going to do one more just to get it a little more rounded and make sure I fill it in, because you want to do enough layers that you don't look at it and see the background yarn through it. So I'm going to come up one more time right in this corner here, and then come over and go back in. And then these are really, this is the best option, especially for little ones, because you, buttons can come off. Safety eyes, unless you have really strong ones and you have really tight knitting, they can also be pulled out. So especially for much younger children, embroidering is really the way to go safety wise. Plus it also gives you a lot of flexibility, because then you don't have to worry, like, do I have, you know, 2 black buttons that match, and that sort of thing. So then at this point, what you can do is you can go to the back. You can see here I've got a bit of a loop that I didn't intend to make. But then we can knot this one off and then move on to the other eye and the nose. And this is, you know, some people are very anti-knot, some people are pro-knot. This is one of those situations where I like to do a double knot. Sometimes I'll go back and do a square knot and weave in a little bit. And then I'm going to show you what you can do too once you have tied it off. If you are like me and just tied it off too tight because I was rushing, you are able to lift these threads to get them back to where you want them to go to create the shape you want. And then I'm going to show you how you would go in and create that highlight on the eye. Pull this back through so I can fix that bit I just messed up. And you're going to do the nose the same way. The only difference with the nose is I tend to start a bit wider and then narrow out. And of course, I'm just making a mess at this point. Let me cut this guy that I accidentally went through. Get these guys back in there. And then for the vertical pieces, like the mouth and the little, I always forget what it's called, this little vertical piece. But you can see with the nose, like I said, you're going to do it the same way, except you're going to go vertical with your satin stitch. So instead of going side to side, like we did with the eyes, you're going to go vertical and creating it a little bit wider at the top, narrower at the bottom. And then just pull this without a nose on my guy, because I want to give you guys at least a minute to ask any questions. So yeah, if you have questions while I'm doing this, please ask them. But I'll show you once you have, so we'll just pretend that this is the nose right now. Once you get to the bottom, you'll pull a piece through and then take one long vertical stitch to create that vertical piece. And again, we'll adjust that to make sure it stays visible. And then same thing, we're going to go a slightly diagonal stitch here, and then another slightly diagonal stitch up. So let me know if you guys have any questions, since I know I'm running out of time now. But I'm so glad that you guys could join me today. And I know it's very warm here. I hope if any of you are in any of those very cold and snowy places, that at least spring is on the horizon for you. But here I'm going to show you what that vertical, like that next diagonal stitch, is going to look like. So then you would just come down. And pull through. And then again, we go back and fluff those pieces out so you can see them. And then what I always recommend too, once you do this, is going back over so you can kind of fill in these spots with another little stitch over top to secure that. But I thank everyone so much for coming today. I'm so glad you could join us. And like I said, you can find the bear hat that is in this pattern on Premier Yarn's YouTube page. And that also is a bit slower paced since it is not, being done live. It was made specifically for, to help people new to knitting in the round and, working small items like the bear ears. But thanks so much. I hope you guys are having a great Saturday, and I hope you managed to learn something today. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.